bring your insight to this discussion, because you will have read the book just like we will have read the book, and you will have certainly an opportunity to share with us. And so we hope to create that space for you to do that. With that being said, I acknowledge that not everyone has the book at this point. We're hoping to get more of the books by next week. Some of you may have been able to go online and get the book already. Some of you may have read it in the past. But I recognize that many of us don't actually have the book at this point. So for that reason, we're going to try to summarize as we go through to keep you up to speed with what the book's talking about. And so the insights that you offer will come from a couple of places. They're going to come from what you read in the book, certainly, but they're also going to come from what you hear others saying is in the book. But it's also going to come from just the experiences that you had as a member of the church at Metropolitan. So those are the places that you draw upon to bring insight to this discussion. Any book study starts with some ground rules. And we've got a few, not many, but a few very important ground rules. One is that you be present. And what do I mean by that? Certainly that you attend, whether online or in person, but you attend as regularly as you can. I know not everybody can attend every week for 6 to 8 weeks, but attend as often as you can. The other thing, though, about being present is kind of put the distractions aside while you're here. While you're in this study, I know there's a lot of things vying for your attention. So if you can, try to push those aside for this 1 hour that we have together so that you are fully absorbed in what we're talking about. So that's number one. Number two is to be honest in this discussion. This is an opportunity and a safe space for us to be honest with one another. You're going to hear some things in this book that are going to bristle you. But I think this is the time for us to really put our cards on the table and call it like we see it. Being honest means being open, don't hold back, and being forthright. You don't have to pull a whole lot of punches here, right? Because we're family and we want to get better. So be honest in your discussion. The third ground rule, and this is the last ground rule, is to be respectful. Think about your comments before you say them. Think about whether or not they're going to be hurtful to anyone, because that is not our intent, to hurt anyone's feelings here, right? So be very respectful in your comments. Not only the content of your comments, but be respectful of the time that we have together, right? I know me anyway. Anytime I want to make a comment, boy, I got to set it up with all this background, and I've got to give these examples, and pretty soon I've made a comment that's taken 5 minutes, right? Try to be very concise, direct, and to the point with your comments. So respect others who have comments to make, and respect the time that we have together, because we only have an hour. So those are the ground rules. Pretty simple. Be present, be respectful, and be honest. Okay? So before we get started, because I'm ready to jump in here, before we get started, are there any questions either in the audience or online? Any questions about what we're doing? Okay. Hearing none. If you do have questions or thoughts as we go through this, interrupt. I want this to be a fairly interactive. I don't have a set, talking points that I want to go through, and nobody can interject. This is a very interactive session. I hope that it is. So anyway, I want to start with the introduction to the book, because it really sets the stage for what's going on in this book. And I think it's important that we understand what stage we're standing on before we delve too far into the concepts of the book. But the book is written in what I consider to be a very interesting literary style for a book about organizational development. Fiction. This is a book of fiction. And you say fiction, how in the world would you write a fiction book about such an important topic as the development of the church? But I think the author is trying to take some of the sting out of the concept. So he's not talking about any particular church. He's not talking about any particular people, because to do so would put a church or some people maybe even on edge a bit that he's talking about them. So it's a very, it's a fictional book with some very important concepts in it. So you may see that when you start to read the book, you think, this is fiction, but I want you to take it seriously. Don't look at it as fiction and think it's fluff, because it has some really good concepts in it. But the author describes a fictitious church with fictitious members. However, they are facing very real challenges, some of which we are experiencing right here in Metropolitan. So what I invite you to do is to look beyond the fictitious church and see Metropolitan. I invite you to look beyond the fictitious people and see yourself. I think you'll find yourself in this book as we begin to look at it. You know, there's an overriding question that dominates this book, right? If you can think about this, it's how do we respond to change when it takes us out of our comfort zones? You ever thought about that? How do I respond to change? Change is hard. But the question is, how do I respond to change when it becomes uncomfortable? When it's something I'm not used to, when it's something I'm not even comfortable with, how do I respond to that? You know, as people of faith, the answer to that question maybe lies directly in the definition of faith, right? Because there's a lot of things that we sometimes don't even understand. There's a lot of things that we certainly can't control. But we trust God, right? And so that's what this book is calling us to do, is to really evaluate how we respond to change when we are taken out of our comfort zone. You know, it's another important slice, and I want to get this out right up front, that as we talk about this backdrop of change in the church in particular, the author really hones in on the tension between generations, right? The tension between generations. So the author's really looking at, there's a lot of facets of change, you know, that we can talk about, but the author is really honing us in on the tensions that change creates between various generations in the church, right? So I want you to look for that as we talk about that and think about the tension between the generations in Metropolitan. You know, what this author is challenging us to do as it relates to these generations is for each generation to see, value, and embrace what the other generation brings to the table, right? You know, Pastor talked about diversity being one of our strengths, right? So this is an opportunity for us to really embrace that and really value what each generation brings to the table. As the church begins, and we'll get a little bit more into, as the book begins, we'll get a little bit more into it. There's the undertones of a conflict brewing at the church, right? There's a specific conflict brewing at the church. And the pastor of the church convenes a small group of folks, I think about 15 folks, to come together and talk through, wrestle with the conflict that's going on in the church. As they come together for this first meeting, nobody knows what to expect. What is this going to be about? You know, the pastor has called us together. We know we've got this conflict going on. and the pastor has called 15 of us together, what's going to happen? Is the pastor getting ready to chastise us? Is the pastor getting ready to resign? You know, we just really don't know what's going to happen. So people come to this gathering, this small group, with a lot of anxiety, including the pastor. The pastor doesn't know how this discussion is going to go, but he takes the step to bring everyone together. Question for you. When conflict arises in the church, what do you think about this strategy of the pastor grabbing some folks together and saying, let's talk about what's going on? What do you think about that strategy? Anybody online or in person? Good strategy, bad strategy? None? Okay.
I think that's a good strategy.
You think it's a good strategy?
Yeah, if you can bring people, maybe they can share what they're feeling and what's going on.
Yeah. But you know something? Bringing folks together to talk about a difficult topic, I mean, it's not easy. I mean, it takes a lot of courage to bring folks together and work through our conflict. But one of the other approaches you can take is to bury your head in the sand, to act like conflict's not there. If we ignore it long enough, maybe it will go away. But one of the things this pastor's to be commended for in this book is that he didn't do that. He kind of said, let's hit it head on and let's try to deal with that. You know, the folks that he brings together are church folks. They all know each other. They got history together. You know, probably a lot like us here on this call today. You know, folks who have been a part of the church. Church is important, and we got history together, right? You know, they all their lives, these folks in this small group, all their lives they've been taught about tithing, right? Give 10%. And they've taken it to heart. They tithe regularly. And the way that they tithe is they take their money and they put it in a numbered envelope and they seal it up and they drop it in the offering tray. You know, that's their routine for how they tithe. I'm just trying to give you a sense of who these folks are. These folks show up. These people support the church. These folks are dependable, right? However, there are changes going on in the church that are making these folks uncomfortable. They're becoming increasingly annoyed with the church, and they're starting to show their annoyance in their attendance and in their offering. So the pastor's getting a very direct view that these folks are having a problem with what's going on in the church. They're not supporting things the way that they once did. They're not giving the way that they once did. So this becomes a very tangible problem for the church. You know, if you think about churches, even at Metropolitan, we often attract and recruit pastors to come and lead us. And one of the tenets we always have is we want this new pastor to come in and breathe new life into the church, breathe new life into the ministries of the church. But ironically, it seems as though as soon as the pastor starts to innovate, starts to do things that we haven't always done before, we feel a bit threatened, right? And we start to feel like we are losing control. What has happened to our church? I don't even recognize this church anymore. What is going on here? You ever felt that way at Metropolitan? This is where we need to be a little bit honest here, right? Trying to think of some of the things that have bristled me. You know, I don't know, you guys remember when pastors start having people walk up to the pulpit and do things like give announcements and things like that? Boy, that bristled me, because I grew up in a church in Metropolitan, where this was holy ground. Nobody walked up here but a minister, right? Man, that threw me for a loop, to just see people going up there and talking about we're going to have a chicken dinner or something. You know? I don't know about you, but there are things that happen in the church that rub me the wrong way. I start to say, I don't recognize that church anymore. You know, people join church. We just had folks join church Sunday, right? Remember when people used to walk down, they used to sit on the front row. Pastor used to come down, shake their hand, used to introduce them to the congregation. What happens now? Huh? They go in the back room. They come down front. We see them come down, but then they go in the back room, right? Man, I don't know if I recognize this church anymore. What is going on? Right? Remember when we used to have a mass choir? All the folks that used to sing up in the choir. What do we have now? 5 or 6 people up here, 7, 8 people up here singing. We don't have that mass choir. And we used to have one of the best choirs in the city. I don't recognize this church anymore. I feel like we're losing control. Any of you feel that way? What's bristling you about what's going on at church? Anybody? Come on, we got to be honest here. Get the microphone, Brother Terry, or Sister Terry. Sister Terry. Oh, okay. Brother Foster. Is it on? Not working? Let me see. There you go.
Yeah, I think that many of us see that. But I think the other thing that we're dealing with, that the author of this book did not deal with, we want to blame a lot of things on the pandemic. Things have changed because of the pandemic. But we have to look beyond the pandemic and recognize that there are changes that are occurring in the church that we used to know. I grew up in this church like you, and a lot of things that I see, they're different now, and we have to be open to discuss those differences and express our opinion, but also value the opinion of others.
Yeah. But before you give the mic away, give me something specific that bristles you about the way we do church now.
Well, one of the things that you talked about is our choir.
Yeah.
You know, I've traveled across the country a lot, and there are churches that still have the large 50 and 75 voice choirs, and I can remember our choir. I look at our usher board. On a good Sunday, we might have 10 ushers, and I can remember when ushers, when they marched around, they circled this whole sanctuary. Yeah. And those are changes that it's a little hard for me to accept. That this is the same, you know, metropolitan that I grew up in. Okay. And so we have to really kind of be bold enough to look at those changes and to see how we can adapt to the changes, because the one thing that is a constant that doesn't change is that we still have God.
We still have God. Thank you for that. Sister Terry, I think you had a comment. Be brave.
Be brave, be bold. Ask me that question again.
So what things are occurring in the church that bristle you, that make you feel uncomfortable with church?
Time-limited sermons.
Wow.
And I say that only because I vividly remember several guest ministers who were doing an incredible job,
and they would comment, only got 10 minutes or only got
Yeah.
5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm here to hear what they have to say.
Yeah.
So I want to be clear, I don't want a 40-minute sermon.
Yeah.
But I think putting people under the pressure of, and I don't know what it is,
Yeah.
but it seems short.
Short. Okay. Sermons are time constrained. Okay. Anybody else?
I think what bugged me is when there's trying to do it now, is when the deacons were not able to be up front. And, I love the first Sunday now that they come back.
Yeah.
They bring something to the audience,
Yeah.
something like that. And to me, not seeing the deacons, and they sit anywhere all over the church,
Yeah.
and you can't identify them, and I think that's what bugs me.
Yeah. 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 Deacons don't have as prominent of a face anymore as they once did. Anyone online? What's bugging you? All right, don't make me point you out. Come on, Reverend Days. I know it's something that's got to be bothering you about the way we do church.
Well, it's in general, it's worship is love expressed, and I have issues with us not really, and we're doing a better job than when we started out, but in our giving, we don't put enough expression on how much that is a part of worship.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Yeah.
kind of.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I'm pushing you because I want you to know this is a safe place to say what's on your heart. So I appreciate those of you who have offered some conflict or some thoughts. Let's go back to the book. Let's talk a little bit about the conflict. I told you there was some conflict going on here. Let's talk a little bit about what that conflict is. This conflict arose out of a $150,000 budget proposal to upgrade the technology in the sanctuary. They want to spend $150,000 to upgrade the technology in the sanctuary. Sound familiar? Sound familiar? And one, they're talking about new lighting, new sound systems, projectors, screens, all of that. Kind of similar to what Metropolitan undertook a couple years ago. And one might think, who would be opposed to that, right? But there was, at this meeting where the proposal was brought forth, there was a very vocal minority who spoke up in opposition to spending money, the church's money, on upgrading their technology. They drowned out the people who were in support of it. This vocal minority drowned out anybody who was in favor. They didn't really get a voice because this vocal minority was so strong. As a matter of fact, these folks were mad. Not only were they mad, they were a bit disrespectful to one another, their brothers and sisters in Christ, right? They were a bit disrespectful to them because they opposed this whole idea of upgrading the technology in the sanctuary. So that was the catalyst for this conflict, so much so they didn't even get to vote on it. They shut the meeting down and left. And you can imagine how everybody was feeling when they left that meeting. When you think about church today, and I'm just gonna say something very blunt to you here. Young people today are not that interested in traditional churches like ours, like Metropolitan. There's too many traditions to fight against. There are too many unwritten rules, too many change-resistant people. Funny thing is, 20, 30, 40 years ago, we were those young people. And in 20, 30 years, they will be us with their own set of rules and traditions that they hold dear to. You remember when we were the young, frustrated generation? Can you remember that when you wanted to do something and those in the church opposed it? I was reading a study out of Howard University. It was published in their Hilltop publication. And matter of fact, just a few weeks ago, I guess it was, August 14th, 2023, so it's very current. And it said, according to a Pew Research study, 49% of black millennials and 46% of black Gen Zers reported that they rarely or never attend religious activities. One prominent comment from the studies was, sometimes the ways leaders in the church interact with young people make me feel distant. The most alienated people in the church, who do you think they are? Any idea? The folks who are the most alienated. Huh? Young people? But more than young people, it is the LGBTQ community, right? These are people who grew up in the church and now are being told you are not going to heaven. Can you imagine that? Growing up your entire life in the church, only to now be told you are an outcast. The most alienated group in the church. You know, the pastor in this book that we're studying, he's not a young person, but what he has done, he's embraced a number of changes that the more traditional members resent. He doesn't wear a necktie, okay? He's instituted small Bible studies in place of Sunday school classes. He's exchanged traditional children's classes for children play areas. He did away with organ music and singing out of hymn books. You can see why people resent some of what he's doing here, right? But instead, he focused on outreach programs that spoke to daily lives. He's got the church now focused on building healthier marriages. He's got the church focused on raising children, faithful children, in a secular world. He's got the church focusing on building peer friendships and support groups. You know, you gotta accept this. In building new programs, the pastor had to abandon some of the older programs. Unfortunately, and I'm just telling you what's in the book here. Unfortunately, this caused generational tension within the church, but it also caused some people to leave the church. We don't like that's a sobering thought, but people left the church because of the changes the pastor was making. He kind of groups the folks that left the church in three categories. The first category is what he calls fundamentalists, right? These were people who were closed to change, and especially change that didn't align with their long-held beliefs. Think about LGBTQIA communities of folks, right? When the church was doing things that didn't align with their long-held beliefs, their minds were closed, and they left the church. He called those fundamentalists. Then there were what he called long-termers. These were long-time members who didn't say anything. They just stepped away. Matter of fact, in some cases, they stepped away to nothing. It's not even like they went to another church or anything. They just stopped doing the church thing, right, altogether. Then the third group of folks who stepped away is what he called floaters. And floaters were folks who scan the call newspaper or look on the internet, see what different churches are doing that week, who's got the most interesting sermon title, what choir is singing, and that's where they attended. They floated around and attended to whatever whatever spoke to them that week. Called those floaters. You may even think of some other types of people who leave the church, whether it's disgruntled or whatever the case may be. But those were the categories that this author identified. Let me ask you a question. How do folks respond? How do folks respond when they feel disconnected from their church? How do folks respond when they feel disconnected from their church? Get the microphone for me.
I think that's when they leave.
They leave. Yeah, that's certainly a response to feeling disconnected, is to just leave. Is there any other kind of response? Stop supporting. Stop supporting. You know, I won't leave the church, but I just won't support what the church is doing. Yeah. How else do people respond when they feel disconnected? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. They disengage. They may even stop giving money, right? Financially. They make their disconnection known in ways like that. Any other thoughts? How do people respond when they feel disconnected from their church?
They also try to find other people in the church that they can commiserate with.
So they become kind of the poison pill in the church. They bring others around to their way of thinking and start to spread throughout the church. Yeah, it's a good way of responding. Yeah, you know, kind of speaking of that, Terry, sometimes when people feel disconnected, I use the word they sabotage, right? They actively go out of their way to harm the success of the church. Yeah. People respond in some dramatic ways when they feel disconnected from their church. So, you know, that's kind of what the author did in terms of introducing us to the book and to the concept. He talked about the problems that the church was undergoing and this small group of folks. As we go through the rest of the book, it's going to center around what happens in this small group with these folks. That becomes the gist of the next 20 chapters of the book. So let's talk a little bit, and we move into chapter 1. And in chapter 1, this pastor convenes this small group of folks for the first time. Remember, I told you they're a bit anxious about what's going to happen, because we just had this blow up at the church meeting about this new sound system, and man, I don't know what's going to happen when we get there. But the pastor does something very interesting to open the meeting. And the pastor says, "It's my fault. I'm sorry. I should have spent more time talking with you, understanding how you felt about things, before I ever brought a $150,000 proposal to the table. I didn't do that. I shortcut it. I just brought it out, and you reacted to it." That's how he started the meeting. "I'm sorry, it's my fault." Right? What do you think the pastor was trying to do by accepting responsibility? What was his strategy? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, he's trying to win them over so they'll go along with him. Okay, good. Anybody else? What's the pastor trying to do here? Brother Booker, I'm gonna get you guys online engaged here. Brother Booker, what's the pastor trying to do when he says it's my fault?
Stan, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I think he was trying to center the issues on himself as opposed to centering the issues on other folks.
Yeah. Yeah, he's trying to take the focus off of other folks and put it on himself. Very good. Very good. Yeah.
And I was going to say, just diffuse the anger. So if
Just
people
to-
are mad about what he spent, for you to start out saying, I'm sorry, it's my fault, shouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
People really don't have a place to go after
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. He's trying to take the temperature down in the room a little bit, right? Because everybody's anxious. Oh, did somebody online have a thought? Okay. All right. Yeah, I think that's right. I think he was trying to do that, all of that. He's trying to win them back. You know, he's trying to take the temperature down. He's trying to take the focus off of the people that they're mad at and put the focus on himself. So probably a pretty good strategy to start off this first meeting. But then he did something interesting. He asked them for their feedback and their attitudes. You know, what are you feeling? What are you thinking, right? So we're starting this meeting. It's my fault. I'm sorry. I apologize. But now tell me what you're thinking about what's going on in the church, much like I just did as we started off in the introduction. Some of the things he heard. Why do these new people feel like they have to change everything we've done for so many years? I never know what to expect when I come to church anymore. I can't get used to not wearing a suit and tie. We honor God by the way we dress in church. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. They're worried about loudspeakers when what we really need is Wednesday night prayer service. We don't have Sunday school anymore. Missions has really gone downhill in the church. We need more doctrinal preaching. We need to teach young people more Bible truth. I miss the choir. Young folks don't give faithfully. Remember, this all started with a conflict about spending $150,000 on technology, and when he asked them how they were feeling, the floodgates opened. Nobody talked about, or very few people talked about what brought us here, but they just opened up and all of their feelings started to come out. Hopefully, some of those comments that those people made, you feel that way about Metropolitan, right? Some of those things that they said, you can identify with because you feel the same way, right? You know, the pastor did something kind of strategic then at that point, after everybody kind of went through their tirade about what was wrong at the church, what they didn't like about the church anymore. He did something kind of interesting. He said, well, I want you to think back then about what we have been doing that was good. I got all the bad stuff, right? But let's talk about what good is going on. And if you've never used that strategy, that's a very interesting strategy to get people off of their complaining wagon, right? And so he thought he was being really smart to talk about it that way, and it was a very good strategy. But you know what the people did? They started talking about stuff that happened 30, 40 years ago. You know, I remember when we had revival way back in 1974, and I remember when we did that, but it was all things, it wasn't current. They weren't coming up with anything that we're doing today that they found beneficial. They even start talking about the songs that they used to sing. And what the pastor recognizes in the book is the songs that they held so dear to and loved so much, they were written over 100 years ago. They didn't hold dear to songs that were written less than 100 years ago. It was interesting. One lady chimed in and she says, someone stole my church and I'd like to get it back. And that's where I think the whole concept of the book begins, with this lady's response. Someone stole my church and I'd like to get it back. Brother TJ, you good? Okay, all right. So we're in chapter 1. They've kind of gone through this tirade about what's wrong. Pastor's starting to uncover there's more to this problem. There's more to this conflict than this budget proposal that I brought to the table. This conflict is deeper than that. I contend that some of the conflict we see at Metropolitan is on the surface. There may be some deeper conflict brewing amongst us. You know, I hear people sometimes say, such didn't speak to me today, right? I don't think we care that much about who spoke to us or not, but there's something deeper brewing under there. Where is the love of our church anymore? We used to be a warm church, and now we don't even speak to each other anymore. You know, what happened there, right? So I just wonder if there's some undercurrent here, like there was in this church, that needs to bubble up so that we can take a hard, direct, fast look at it. So this is what I meant when I said this is an opportunity for us to really look at ourselves and see what changes we can make and how this really impacts us. And I think starting with the truth is a good way to begin. You know, when that lady said somebody stole my church and I like to get it back, I think the pastor felt, well, matter of fact, he states, he says he felt like he was an accomplice to the burglary. He was part of the ones who helped folks steal the church from folks, right? He took these folks' comments very personally, right? And people may have said, oh, don't take it personal, you know, blah, blah, blah. But he's the leader of the church. And with what they were saying, he took it very personally. You know, the pastor was very honest, and he stated, some of the things that you guys want are never coming back. They're never coming back. And so I think we've got to say things to each other like that sometimes. We moved on, right? And what you held dear to is not coming back. We want you to now hold dear to something new. We have to, you know, the pastor, you know, said there were things that one generation had made happen, right? These things that we're holding on to. One generation made them happen, right? But we're not going to be here forever. And a new generation wants to make new things happen. Just like we wanted to make things happen. And what we have to do is we have to figure out how can we embrace and rejoice in their vision. I mean, don't you know what a blessing it is to have someone who loves the church so much that they want to see it thrive? You may not agree with their approach, right? But at least accept the fact that they love the church as much as you do, and they want to see it thrive in today's environment. We've got to figure out how we embrace and rejoice in their vision. You know, while the feedback was painful for the pastor to hear, it hurt him, it cut him to the core. The pastor suggests in the book that this small group that we've convened here together, let's meet on a regular basis. Let's don't just meet today and talk about this stuff and that's the end of it. Let's come back together and meet on a regular basis and to talk through the issues that you're espousing and even the things that you're feeling about what's going on. he says we need to figure out what change is, and we need to figure out why change has to happen, right? Remember I told you change is difficult, but change is necessary, right? Change is necessary. And so he wants to bring this small group together to explore that whole concept around change, what it is, and why we have to change. We can't stay the same. We have to we have to release the church. Wow, that's an interesting concept. We have to release the church into the hands of others and do it with enthusiasm. See, church is something we hold on to. It's ours, right? Who Stole My Church is the title of the book. But we have to figure out how we release the church into the hands of others and do it enthusiastically. When you begin to look at others and say, they love the church just as much as I do, that's the first step in releasing the church into their hands. We have to deal with some new realities. The world that we're in today is not the same world we were in yesterday. So we can't keep doing church as though we live in a foreign world, in a world of yesterday. We've got to face the realities of the world we live in today, right? Y'all know, growing up, we respected our elders, right? I don't know if that's a theme with a lot of today's youth, especially unchurched youth, right? We feared our elders. I think our elders now fear the young people today, right? We just had 2 shootings on Prospect. You know, we didn't have that type of gun violence. We had violence, fights and things like that, but people got to walk away. But that's not the reality anymore. We didn't have the prevalence of things that prey on our communities the way that they do today. We had schools that at least seemingly cared about us, whether we took advantage of it or not. But today, it's almost as though it's a factory just to move us through. But that's the reality that the church is operating within. We have to deal with some new realities. You know, everyone agreed, yeah, we'll meet on a regular basis. And the remainder of the book, as I mentioned, really explores what comes out of those meetings. So when we get into the next chapters, we're going to start with one of those meetings and the discussion that occurs in that meeting and what tangible things come out of that meeting. You know, can you think about some changes that have happened, you know, even shortly in our church? You know, things like, I don't know, women wearing pants to church, or, you know, women in ministry, women deacons. You know, we had a big uproar in our church at one point about choir members who were also part of secular groups. You know, we don't think a lot about that anymore. Our world is changing around us. So next week, we're going to start in chapter 2. And what's going to happen in chapter 2? I hope you get a chance to read it, but if not, we'll explore it like we did today. The author is going to reveal for us. We've heard about what everybody thinks about the church, right? The author is going to reveal for us, what does God think about the church? Because that's an important question to ask. What does God think about the church? Brother Lawton?
The next 2 weeks,
Oh, yeah, get
the next 2 weeks in terms of schedule, it won't affect the 12 noon Bible study, but it may have some effect on the evening. We
Okay.
have a service here next Wednesday night,
Yeah,
and then the following Wednesday is the old-fashioned Bible study.
Yeah.
Prayer meeting, rather.
yeah. I think one of the things, we're going to try to honor the old-fashioned, in 2 weeks and be able to make sure everybody can participate in that. But next week, I think what we're going to do is try to assemble in the Connor Franklin room for those who will be in person. That way, the service can go on in the sanctuary, and then we can continue the Bible study next week. So we will miss a week in 2 weeks, but next week we're going to try to assemble in Connor Franklin. Am I getting that right, TJ? Okay.
I just wanted to say the books are kind of hard to get. We have books, you may have seen in the newsletter that there will be a limited number available next Wednesday.
Okay.
But also, both audio books and digital copies are endless. So if you are into that kind of thing, you want to read it on your computer or on your phone or your iPad or your Kindle or whatever,
Yeah.
you can get the book that way instead of having to wait for an actual hard copy.
All right. Perfect. Well, that takes us through the introduction and chapter 1. So before we close, are there any thoughts, any aha moments, any insight that anybody wants to share that we didn't get an opportunity to do so? Okay. All right. Are you excited about digging into this? Does it look like it could be beneficial for us? I'm getting some nods. Okay. All right. All right. Well, again, thank you for being here, and we will end at this moment and look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you.